The 2024 Clemson football season is in the books. In fact, it's been in the books for a few days now, but I just wanted to take some time off, enjoy Christmas, and then come back with some of that seasonal joy and cheer to review the season. I'm going to talk about what went right, what went wrong, and how we can learn from what went wrong and right and apply it to the 2025 season. But first, welcome to the channel. I'm glad you're here. A lot of you have started subscribing. I do appreciate it. If you enjoy supporting independent media, I hope you'll subscribe. It is free. Let's dive in. In the preseason, I predicted Clemson would go 9-3. You can find my video, the 2024 Clemson football preview. And I said 9-3, but I didn't see them going to the conference championship. I didn't see them definitely going to the college football playoff. I was right and I was wrong. They went 9-3, but they won their 10th game in the conference championship, and they went to the college football playoff. Let's start with the first game. I predicted that Clemson would lose to Georgia. Why? Because I felt like Clemson would get out-coached across the board. Clemson went into that game, and at the end of the first quarter, it was 0-0. At the end of the first half, it was 6-0 Georgia, and Clemson's defense, everybody buckle up. And who would have known those would be the best 2 quarters of defensive play our football team on the defensive side of the ball would play the entire season. I will go as far as to say that was the best defensive effort in those 2 quarters that Georgia saw all season. Prove me wrong. It looked like it. Unfortunately, in the second half, Clemson's conservative offensive play calling or scheme or whatever you want to blame it on began to wear out the defense. They could only put up with 3 and outs or turning over the football here and there, or some bad mistakes by this guy, or dropping a pass here or there, or a false start, before it just started to wear on them, and Georgia won 34-3. So everybody was like, Clemson was overrated, while turning a blind eye to the truly overrated teams in the top 15 that should have never been able to spell top 15. But everyone was fine with that. They were more than happy just to single out Clemson. Anyway, the very next week, Clemson plays Appalachian State in Death Valley at night. Now, we all know Appalachian State has that reputation to go into big stadiums and beat teams they don't supposed to beat. They've done it multiple times. But who knew that this would be the worst Appalachian State team to play football there in years? So much so that when the season was over, their head coach was no longer retained. In fact, they hired South Carolina's offensive coordinator, Dowell Loggins. He's now running the show. But Clemson came into that game really irritated with their performance against Georgia. A lot of people were, they were questioning any and everything about Clemson. And then Clemson beats Appalachian State 66-20. At the end of the first quarter, Clemson was up 35-0. The end of the first half, Clemson was leading 56-13 at halftime. Klubnik finished the game, which I don't think he played in the second half at all, if my memory serves me correct. 24 of 26, 378 yards, and 5 touchdowns. We were confused. Again, we didn't know that Appalachian State was going to be that bad, but good Lord, scoring 35 points in the first quarter? That's a big deal. 56 points in the first half? It's ridiculous. People were happy yet confused. I know I was. The next week, Clemson would play against NC State, a team that I believed had a good shot of beating Clemson in Death Valley. Now, granted, they hadn't done it since the early 2000s when Phillip Rivers was playing quarterback for them, beating Clemson at Death Valley. But hey, who knew? NC State had raided the transfer portal, got one of my favorite players out of the portal, Grayson McCall, the incredible QB out of Coastal Carolina. Unfortunately, he had to retire from football because he had sustained too many head injuries. I hated it, and it's one of the sad marks on the season for me, because whether he played for the opposing team or not, I've just always appreciate appreciated his playability. But NC State came into that game with Concepcion and Rogers and all these different players, and Clemson beat them 59-35. The week before, NC State just got thrashed by Tennessee in Charlotte. I believe it's 51-10 right off the top of my head. NC State didn't have that good of a season. In fact, this year it was pretty rough. They finished 6-6 and 10th in the ACC. Concepcion hit the portal. Now, the next game was really interesting for a variety of reasons. It was the first time that Clemson had played Stanford since the bowl game back in the 80s against Jack Elway. But Stanford, first year in the ACC, and then on top of that, the day before, Hurricane Helene hit the upstate. Stanford flew in, played Clemson. Clemson won 40-14. Stanford actually played them much better than what the score implies. They did a pretty good job offensively, and it was one of the first times that we saw a team that was not that great take advantage of Clemson's defense. You started to see some miscommunication there, and I really point out this Stanford game more than Georgia because, as I said, in the first half against Georgia, Clemson, I believe, played their best football defensively all season and probably the best defense in that first two quarters that Georgia saw all season. But Stanford had something for Clemson's defense. But Clemson wins, and we're all told to shut up, stop complaining, put on your happy britches. We'll get back to that in a second. Clemson plays Florida State, the worst story I have seen in college football in quite a while. A team that went undefeated the year prior and won their conference championship. We know what happened in the Orange Bowl against Georgia. Even with players sitting out, shouldn't have been that bad. But, we were told, and I challenge you, go back to my video from last year where I announced that DJ would be joining Florida State, and look at the arrogance that flooded my page when I talked about players they were losing, and I didn't know, no offense to DJ, if he was the right man for the job. Oh, hindsight is 20/20. Go back. Look at those comments. In fact, feel free to comment today on it. You'll have some fun. Clemson played Florida State and beat them in Tallahassee 29-13. Now, in the preseason, I thought that Florida State would beat Clemson. They were not as they ended up being mentally. That didn't make sense. Anyway, Florida State blocked, 2 kicks in that ball game? 2 kicks? We're like, what's going on here? Yeah, just wait. There's multiple blocked kicks in the future. But anyway, Clemson beats Florida State. They're 29-13. And at this point, they're on a 4-game winning streak. They go to Wake Forest, beat the crap out of Wake Forest. By the way, Dave Clawson's no longer with Wake Forest. That's crazy. By the way, Florida State Mike Norvell fired a bunch of people because Florida State couldn't fire Mike Norvell. Remember, they gave him, a $60 million buyout? So as I've jokingly, but kind of accurately said, Mike Norvell could walk up to the president of Florida State, punch his wife in the face, and they'd say, don't press charges. We owe him too much money. They play Wake Forest. They beat them 49-14. Clemson is now on a 5-game winning streak. Then Virginia comes to town. Tony's homecoming. Clemson jumped out in front and started to take control of the game. But what did they do? They allowed Virginia to get back in the ballgame. Allowed them to get back in the ballgame. Now, at halftime, Clemson was up 17-10. It was a close game. We're like, what is he doing? Yeah, you remember, Tony is an alumni, and we get he played here and coached with you and everything, but your dedication is to Clemson, not Tony. In the third quarter, Clemson scored 21 points, but they also allowed 21 points in the fourth quarter. Clemson won 48-31. Cade Klubnik threw for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in that game. Kobe Pace, former Clemson player, he played against the Tigers as well. TJ Moore had a solid game, 4 receptions, 78 yards. And then the game that to me really makes me scratch my head, because at this point, you're 6-1, and you're playing a Louisville team that at this time has lost 3 football games. They had lost 3 football games, granted, to Notre Dame, who was in the college football playoff. SMU made the college football playoff. And they lost to Miami, who didn't make the college football playoff. Oh, my God. No offense, some of you Miami fans. Some of you Miami fans, y'all are really good people. But to the ones who's just obnoxious. I had one tell me, you stop worrying about Miami. Start worrying about yourself. How's that Pop-Tart bowl? That's good. Louisville came to town, and they beat Clemson at night in Death Valley, and that was the first time that Clemson had lost at night in Death Valley since, 2013? It was the first time since, I believe, 2013 that Clemson had lost 2 home games in the same season. Remember, Louisville blocked a kick or 2 in this game as well. At halftime, Louisville was up 17-7. At the end of the third quarter, Louisville was up 26-7, and we saw some of the most lackadaisical emotions during the fourth quarter as Clemson tried to mount a comeback. They scored 14 points in the fourth quarter, and you were sitting there going, will you speed up? They wouldn't speed up. To me, this may be, believe it or not, the most frustrating game of the season, because it spelled there's more, or it said it, there's more going on here than just playing a good Georgia team and them losing to a good Georgia team. First game of the year, all the excuses that people regurgitate year after year just to lie to themselves about if someone's actually that good. This Louisville game, you couldn't do that. It didn't make sense. And when Louisville won that ball game, Clemson gets their first conference loss. But because SMU and Miami didn't have to play one another, there was a chance that Miami and SMU could run the table and Clemson be left out. Clemson's defense struggled against Louisville. Now, Tyler Shuck, though it's spelled show, or shoe, Shough, his name is pronounced Shuck. You need to understand, he only passed for 156 yards, but they rushed for 210 yards. Clemson had more total offense than them. They had 228 in the air, 222 on the ground. But remember, Clemson doesn't give up over 200 yards rushing. Or that's what we thought. Phil Maffa rushed for 171 yards in this game, by the way. It was a really good game for Phil. They lose this game and everybody's scratching their head. I've spent more time on this Louisville game because to me, this is the one. This is the game that proved so much. The very next week, Clemson went to Blacksburg, played Virginia Tech, and they won that game 24-14. Ashton Hampton had arguably one of the best interceptions of the entire college football season for college football. That joker went in and scooped like ice cream the football out of the hands of the wide receiver. This was the second pass in a row they had picked on him. This time, he picked it off. Maffa ran for 128 yards, Cade threw 3 touchdowns and only 1 interception. And in this game, it was kind of interesting because Clemson only allowed 40 yards rushing. Clemson only allowed 228 total yards in this game. Now, granted, Virginia Tech's quarterback and running back were beat up, but, I mean, after that Louisville game, you couldn't be shocked or fooled by anything. You couldn't assume that, let me rephrase that, you couldn't assume that Clemson was just going to come out and win. Everybody felt like at that point before the Louisville game, they've got this thing under control, and we have to respect Braun because he can coach, but it's not going to go down like it actually went down. So going in and playing Virginia Tech, had to be careful. Clemson wins that game. They play Pitt. They play at Pitt. They didn't have to play Pittsburgh's starting quarterback. They didn't have to play the guy. They played their backup quarterback. He threw for 350 yards on Clemson's defense. You smell what the Rock's cooking? You thinking about the college football season Clemson just played? Clemson gave up 438 total yards in this game. They only allowed 88 on the ground, but again, 350 in the air. Clemson couldn't get the running game started. They only rushed for 58 yards in this game. Cade threw for 288 and 2 touchdowns. But Cade Klubnik used his legs to show out, and he ran a 50-plus yard touchdown to win the game. Remember, Clemson was up 17-7 at half. They blew the lead. And it took Cade Klubnik using his legs on the long touchdown run. Remember, Antonio Williams, 13 receptions, 149 yards and 2 touchdowns. Good to see Antonio Williams get back in this season and play after last year. Clemson played the very next week. Of course, they win the game against Pittsburgh, 24-20, kind of an eyebrow raiser. At the same time, SMU had just beat Pittsburgh by 23 points. So it was like, hold on, SMU's better than us? We don't get this. Another embarrassing spot on the season was Clemson's 51-14 win over the Citadel, the little military school in beautiful Charleston, South Carolina. You go, well, Brian, you just said they won by 37 points. Stop being so negative. Well, Clemson gave up 288 yards on the ground to the Citadel. That's right. 288 yards on the ground. Not to Georgia, to the Citadel. Who knew? Clemson did win that ball game 51-14, but everybody saw what happened and they couldn't unsee it. It was like walking in on your grandparents kissing. Yeah, sure. They're married. They have children. But your grandparents don't kiss, right? No. Forbid that they kiss. You couldn't unsee it. And then Clemson goes in and plays against South Carolina, and we saw that South Carolina game. And it was just tough. Lenoris Sellers ended up using his legs to break more tackles than been broke against Clemson in a long, long time. He rushed for 166 yards and 2 touchdowns on 16 carries. In fact, if you go and you watch Lenoris Sellers, his playability in the game, he was the difference. Now, Cade Klubnik, on the other hand, had the 2 scores for the Tigers, and he played really, really, really well. And he threw the interception at the end, but he threw it to a Phil Maffa who was hurt, couldn't even move his arm good. And you kind of question what happened there. Why would you continue to send Phil out? I mean, there comes a point where you look at Phil and say, I know this is your last game in the Valley, but bro, you literally can't move your arm good. Cade did throw for 280 yards in this game. Antonio Williams had 8 receptions for 99 yards. And Maffa struggled with only 66 yards rushing. In this game, South Carolina rushed for 267 yards. They had 431 total yards. We saw yet again, Clemson's defense falling apart. Now, we know that Cade he throws the picks, not the pick six. He threw an interception there at the end of the game. And it all but kept Clemson out of the playoffs. If they would have won that game, a lot of people believed that they would get in a large bid to play in the college football playoff, especially beating South Carolina. And this was the highest ranked Clemson versus South Carolina game since 2013 or something like that. But Cade Klubnik having that game, He had that game, and I know that everybody was upset that he threw the interception at the end, but the guy threw for 3,639 yards, 36 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions this season. Last year, he threw for 19 touchdowns, and he threw for 9 interceptions. Klubnik definitely improved, and the offense definitely became more comfortable around him. And if you want to talk about team leaders, and I'm using ESPN. I mean, if you're familiar with the app, you'll be like, oh, I know exactly what he's reading from. That's totally fine. Maffa rushed for 1,115 yards in his final season at Clemson. The last 3 ball games, arguably, he was pretty beat up. Antonio Williams, after having a ton of injuries, I say a ton of injuries, he was just injured his entire sophomore campaign, basically. 904 yards receiving. And you have Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore, the 2 outstanding freshmen, came in and showed out, my friend. Jake Brenningstool, 530 yards receiving, 7 touchdowns. These guys did what they could do. By the way, Cade Klubnik rushed for 463 and 7 touchdowns. On the defensive side of the ball, yeah, Clemson's scheme was not there. Clemson's preparation and adjustments, they were not there. But T.J. Parker finished with 11 sacks on the season. Barrett Carter didn't have the season that he wanted. He was still the leading tackler in sacks for the season. Leading tackler, on the team with 82 tackles. He was tied with Wade Woodus, and they both had over 3 sacks. Carter had 3.5 sacks. Wade had 3 sacks. Sammy Brown, the true freshman, came in, 3rd leading tackler on the team, and was pulled from the South Carolina game. A lot of people still irritated about that. Guy was tackling people when nobody else could. He had 80 tackles and 5 sacks as a true freshman. Peter Woods, banged up, got really hurt in the Appalachian State game, missed significant time, had 3 sacks on the season, 26 tackles. They moved him to defensive end. I wish they hadn't have done that. I know why they did it, but I wish they hadn't have done it. Khalil Barnes didn't have the season that a lot of people wanted. There was times that he would get out of place here and there. He still was the leader in interceptions with 4 interceptions, and he had 61 tackles. Guy could play football. So even with all the things that I've talked about and things that are irritating, we saw some pretty good individual stats, and we also saw some improvement with the team. I'll tell you how good Clemson's defense has been over the years, is that people are hitting the roof. I'm extremely concerned about the defense. But if you look today is December the 26th, you go to the NCAA total defense statistics for FBS. You would think that Clemson is ranked number 100 total defense. Nope, they're ranked number 26 in the country. Texas is ranked number 21. So I'm not saying Clemson they don't need to address certain issues on the defense that absolutely they should. But what I am saying, Clemson's still ranked number 26 total defense. Let's go to total offense. Clemson's ranked number 10. Number 10 in the country. Total offense as of today. So let's move on. Let's move on to the conference championship. Clemson, after losing that South Carolina game, we know what happened. They were sitting around irritated, and then suddenly Syracuse and Miami begins to play one of the most interesting games in quite a while. Miami, led by the incredible Cam Ward, was up 21-0. It was like, Syracuse has to win this game. Miami has to lose for Clemson to get in, and they're not going to do it. And what did Miami do? They lost a 21-point lead, and they lost the game. Fran Brown gave a shout-out to Dabo, basically saying, you're welcome. I got you in. Clemson played SMU, a team in their first year in the ACC championship this year, and SMU really hadn't been tested. They had one loss against a BYU team that was not amazing, but they were not bad. But they hadn't played Miami. They hadn't played a team like Georgia. But they did beat Louisville, and Clemson couldn't do it at home. So Clemson goes in, they play SMU in Charlotte for all the marbles. In this game, and you can go look up my preview, I picked Clemson to win the ball game, though there were people who felt like SMU would win it because this, that, and the other. Clemson goes in, they jump out to a quick lead. Some of the offensive scheme, the play calling was some of the best I've seen all season. It looked incredible. Clemson was up 21-7 at the end of the first quarter. They were up 24-7 at halftime, and then guess what happens? They totally lose the lead. Clemson gave up 458 total yards to SMU, 304 in the air, 154 on the ground. Kevin Jennings and Brashard Smith, by the way, Brashard Smith was a wide receiver turned running back out of necessity. They kept running this play where they would have Brashard Smith in the backfield, and then they'd slip him out. And Clemson couldn't figure out how to stop it. That bothers me, because when SMU did that to Penn State in the first round of the college football playoff, Penn State looked at them and said, well, isn't that cute? You're going to try to run that play over and over on us, and they pick-sixed them. They beat the trash out of SMU. And I'm not overly impressed with Penn State, but it just shows you it was like they're doing the same play over and over again. We'll just take it away and see what they got there. What did they have after that? Clemson loses that lead. It's tied up 31-31. Dabo sends out Adam Randall to do a kickoff return after SMU scored a touchdown, was kicking it off, and he told him, said, listen, just return it. Just return the football. See what happens. Well, Adam Randall had an incredible return. Clemson ran a few plays, got the ball into field goal range, but we all know that Clemson gave up, 8 blocks this year? In fact, there was a kick that was about to be blocked in this game. If you go back and you watch it, Nolan Hooser, the true freshman, purposely kicked it the other way, missing the kick because he knew it was about to be blocked. Go back and watch that kick. You'll see it. He doesn't miss that bad. Even though he is a true freshman, the kid is unbelievable. Walks out there, he drills a 56-yard field goal. And Clemson wins the ACC championship. They win game number 10, and they go to the college football playoff as a result of that kick. And then they have to play Texas. Now, during this time, Clemson is, they open up as a 10.5-point underdog to Texas. Texas is the number 5 seed after losing the SEC championship to Georgia. And then by game time, Texas is a 14-point favorite. Now, coming into this game, I said that I felt like Texas had all the pressure in the world on them. All the money they spend. Sark never won in a championship, though he's coached at some really good places. He's never won a championship as a head coach. You have a Manning on the bench. And I just really felt like Clemson was going to have to do something special. But I picked Texas to win this ballgame. Clemson came in. I saw some really good methodical drive. That very first drive. It took 5 or 6 minutes off the clock, capped off by Antonio Williams on a beautiful play design. Clemson was up 7-0, but unfortunately, Clemson's defense played some of the worst I've seen them play all season. Before I dive into that, let's talk about the good. TJ Moore, the true freshman, 9 receptions, 116 yards, 1 touchdown. He had some unbelievable receptions. And Cade Klubnik, 26 of 43, 336 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. He came in and played Texas pretty much the best they've been played all season by a quarterback. Unfortunately, Clemson's defense, they couldn't stop Texas's run. And they gave up 292 yards on the ground. They gave up almost 500 yards of total offense. They gave up 494. Clemson had 412 yards total offense. 336 of it was in the air. Unfortunately, Clemson loses this ball game by 14 points. Texas moves on to play Arizona State. Clemson goes home 10-4 this second season in a row that they've lost 4 ball games. They did get their 10th win. They did get the conference championship and a trip to the college football playoff. So, what can we learn from this season? Well, first off, it seems like the offense is starting to get going. You're seeing a lot more continuity with Cade. We're starting to see more creative plays come from Garrett Riley. We're seeing the talent of the true freshmen and the wide receivers really step up. You always hear it. Clemson's wide receiver room is just not this or that. And I've talked about that. But this year it was different because they did have Wesco and Moore and a healthy Antonio Williams, and they used Brenningstool more. And to me, they still underutilized the guy. But hey, they used him. And we started to see Clemson move the football and get the ball into the end zone as the season progressed. Again, as of today, Clemson finishes total offense as of today, and it will change as the bowl games are played. They're ranked number 10 in the country for total offense. The bad side of this is that Clemson's defense fell apart as the season went on. The adjustments were not there. So you go back to the offensive side of the football, you start to see better offensive play. I'm not saying that they've arrived, but it was getting better. And then how could I forget this? Matt Luke takes over the offensive line. The guys are beat up and they're still trying to learn new techniques and get better continuity as a unit versus what they've had over the past few years. And he's doing it. I mean, they still have to get better. And a lot of those guys are gone. My memory serves me correct. My point is that we're starting to fix the problems. And then the very thing that's kept us in football games for years now, the defense, started selectively falling apart. They started to fall apart. And so it's raised a lot of questions. What needs to be done? So how does this affect 2025? Clemson opens up with LSU. Clemson opens up with LSU next year. And the official schedules, and in fact, I wished I'd had this pulled up already. The exact dates for all the conference games, it hasn't been released yet. But I can tell you who Clemson plays next year. This will not be in order. Now, the very first game will be LSU. Clemson plays LSU, Troy, Furman, at South Carolina, at Boston College, Duke, Florida State, SMU, Syracuse, at Georgia Tech, at Louisville, at North Carolina. Now, who knows who's going to show up for those teams? Who knows who's actually going to be better? Who knows if Belichick will actually even be the coach then and the NFL not call him? Remember that weird buyout timeline? Either way, Clemson will be playing football next year. The question is, with what personnel? And I'm talking about coaching. Now, a lot of people, or some people, believes that Dabo Swinney's going to wait until the college football playoff is over. And he may make some personnel changes. We'll see. But if Clemson, here's the word if Clemson's offensive continuity, Clemson's creativity, Clemson's mojo is kind of back offensively, you would hope that they will fix things defensively. Because if not, guess what? You're trading one flat tire on the right side of the car or just switching around to the left side. It's still a flat tire. And so it'll be interesting to see if there's personnel changes made in the offseason. And I'm talking about the college football playoff is over. It'll be interesting to see that. It'll be interesting to see if Clemson takes more transfer portal players. They got Will Helt out of Purdue. This guy just finished his sophomore season with 56 tackles, 5 sacks. I think he had a pick 6 in their spring game. This guy's massive. You play defensive end, and we need help there. We need more depth along that defensive line. Clemson went and got a wide receiver out of FCS school, Tristan Smith, 6'5", about 205, 210. Different body type to come out there and play. Will they take more transfer players? We know the whole profit sharing thing is going on at Clemson now, and that's going to help attract people. So that will be interesting to see as well what happens in the offseason. Does Clemson suffer losses due to the transfer portal? Do we see any players hitting the transfer portal from Clemson? Do we see any more of those? It's good. It's a good question to ask. Well, the season is over. Clemson, they do get their 10th win. They get their conference championship and the trip to the college football playoff. And for various people, it means various things. There's a lot of people out there who's totally thrilled right now. They're like, we hate we lost, but we accomplished all that. On the other side, you have people who is looking at it going, yeah, but it's seemingly, and I really don't believe in luck, but we'll just use that as a slang word. A lot of luck was involved. And do you really want your football team to have to be lucky? Why do I ask that question? Because luck runs out. It's better just to have good, solid coaching across the board with good, solid players. It's easier to build longevity there versus hoping that your lottery number is called. We will see. Well, folks, thank you so much for joining me on this video. Of course, I'm going to continue to produce videos talking about Clemson football, college football, and so on. If you like what I'm doing, I hope you will subscribe. It is free. Y'all take care of yourself, and as always, go Tigers.